Hey there, so another week, another theory coming at you from My Hero Academia. Last week's chapter was a doozy, man, so I won't go too much into it during the intro, but Jesus Christ, there's so much to unpack and theorize for this week's chapter. So if you haven't read chapter 316, be sure to read it and then come back, because there's gonna be spoilers in this video, and I got a feeling that the villain hunt is gonna take a turn for the worse for our boy Deku after this chapter. And before we open up shop today, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're over 20k, but we're aiming to go even higher. Also, if you enjoy the premieres here on the channel, be sure to hit that notification bell, that way you can become one of the regulars around here. Now, let's go inside and grab ourselves a drink. Welcome to the bar, folks. So, during last week's theory video, I put the energy out there that Overhaul was going to be the one to save Lady Nagant. And honestly, I'm not going to sugarcoat it here, that entire video, pretty much for the most part, was wrong. Some small details did pan out to be true, like All Might being the guy who notified Hawks and company that Deku went radio silent, and through deductive reasoning, the entire cast was able to put two and two together and realize that in addition to Airwalk, One for All outfitted Lady Nagant with an additional quirk that turned her into a walking bomb. But look, there's still a lot to talk about and unpack and theorize for this week's chapter, and I got a feeling that chapter 317 is going to have a Deku that is severely on edge. So let's head over to the wall and break it down. So the first thing I want to talk and kind of get it out of the way is how Hawks was saying to Lady Nagant that he's her replacement. And it makes me kind of sad to think about, because Lady Nagant is the definition of just a tragic hero turned villain. She was never really a true villain in the sense of what it means. She was a villain in the sense that society chewed her up and spit her out instead of helping her experience true rehabilitation. And by being locked inside of Tartarus, she was put inside of a prison that acted as a means to remove her from society. So there was really no shot for her to ever rehabilitate from what she did. Yeah, she committed a pretty serious crime against somebody who was, for more intents and purposes, an even more heinous villain. But in the eyes of society and social constructs, she deserved to sit and rot in prison. And I will say, if an ambulance is on the way, it's certainly possible that Lady Nagant could survive. Though in her last moments before losing consciousness, she lets us know something that we definitely did see coming. The fact that there are going to be other villains hunting down Deku. We don't know whether it's going to be villains from the past or new villains to be introduced, but I have a feeling that the next villain that he's going to encounter will definitely be one from the past, and most likely it's gonna be Stain. It's a clear pattern that's been panning out at this point. And the second little tidbit that I want to talk about is Overhaul and the demeanor of Deku, because after this most recent incident, we have to honestly say that Deku is going through a really tough time. He suffered a pretty serious injury at the hands of Lady Nagant, and the guy that hurt someone very close to him is standing right there pleading for forgiveness. Like, let's just pause real quick and talk about Deku's face right here. This is what we knew Deku to be, a happy-go-lucky individual. Now, he looks like this. Someone has to stop Deku at this point because he's headed towards a cliff. Because the way that he even speaks to Overhaul, it just feels devoid of any emotion whatsoever. Like, he looks at Overhaul dead in the eyes and tells him to keep that same energy and he'll help him get to the boss. But first, he wants him to go and personally apologize to Eri. And not to mention, you're asking Eri at that point to confront her abuser. And it would be even more interesting if Eri is the person that volunteers to go with Overhaul and restore the boss. And during all of this, Lady Nagant manages to utter their next lead. It was that she was supposed to bring Deku within 2 months to a mansion in Hybori Woods. This tells me two things. One, All For One doesn't have a strict timetable on getting Deku. He enlisted a litany of villains to pick this guy up, and he probably has several different locations for them to go and bring Deku to. And secondly, he's expecting failure from each one of these villains to a certain degree. And I can tell you right now, there's one villain that is absolutely not working with All For One, and it is definitely Stain. There's a lot to take into consideration because this chapter was very cut and dry. Deku has been fighting villains for days on end with no rest, and he's becoming emotionally and physically worn out, similar to Koichi in chapter 103 of Vigilantes. And to be quite honest, there really isn't much left for Deku to do besides tossing aside his current allies, because the back half of this chapter is All For One pretty much calling him out personally. Because at the end of the chapter, when they go to the mansion, the heroes are squatted up pretty deep, with the exception of Hawks, because my guess is Hawks went off with Lady Nagant, and instead they have Edgeshot with them, along with Mount Lady and and possibly a few others. Because I think at this point in the chapter, Deku thinks that the minute he opens up this mansion, All For One is going to be standing there ready to fight. And the thing is, this is the main villain of the entire series we're talking about here. Of course he knows everything that's going on. And of course he knows that Lady Nagant was going to turn against him. All of these villains that Deku is encountering are just meant to chip at his emotional state and drive him crazy. Essentially, All For One is trying to give Deku the one bad day, like the Joker tried to do to Commissioner Gordon, because we know that All For One can't steal One For All because One For All's will is too strong, but if he manages to cripple the will of the wielder of One For All, it'll become substantially easier to take. All For One knows that Deku is just a really green superhero, so he's gonna be easily manipulated and easily read. He knew every step Deku was going to make because Deku's head full of steam caused him to disregard every warning he's been given so far. I mean, En repeatedly told him not to abuse Smokescreen, and the third with Fa Jin. I mean, Deku straight up rolled up to the mansion and whipped open the doors with reckless abandon, not even considering what Endeavor had to say. Because my guess is he was gonna say, if you walk into that mansion and face off against All For One in that state, you're gonna lose hands down. And the problem is, even in the wounded state he's in right now, I doubt any hero on scene could possibly take Deku. All For One's main goal right now is to get Deku so worked up that he ostracizes everyone else around him. Meaning next chapter, we're gonna see a Deku that is severely on edge. And when I mean on edge, I mean this guy is going to be losing his grip on being a hero. Because the way that All For One speaks to Deku in this chapter, he no longer has that obsession with All Might. He has the obsession with Deku. The power that Deku has been able to cultivate that no other user of One For All has been able to access has All For One smiling with so much glee. If All For One manages to get a hold of this power, who knows how strong he would be? Because right now, this 16-year-old boy has control of arguably the strongest quirk in human history. And All For One realizes that he can play with his kid's head as much as he wants. Everything that he does is strictly to his benefit right now. And if I were to turn on my critical analysis right here, I would say that this explosion at the end of the chapter was very metaphorical as well as literal. The metaphorical sense of this explosion, in my opinion, is supposed to display Deku's mental state finally reaching its breaking point and exploding. This chapter alone, we've seen Deku steep to a pretty dark place, and he's actually pretty reminiscent of his original design. So I would go out of my way to say that this explosion is meant to be the explosion of anger that we're gonna see Deku have. I'd expect anything from him straight up shrugging off Endeavor to maybe even ignoring All Might. Deku has been the forever optimist, but lately, he's been a little late to the punch to save people. Now, if Deku does go overboard and we see him look absolutely demonic, then one villain that I would want him to encounter is Stain. Because if there's anybody out there who understands the dark side of what it means to be a hero, it's Stain. He would definitely have some choice words for Deku if he encounters Deku looking the way that I'm possibly thinking of him looking. I mean, the explosion at the end of the chapter had to have fried his costume to a certain degree, and he already looked pretty damn ragged. So I'm expecting in chapter 317 for Deku to look absolutely insane, and maybe even reminiscent of a villain to the point where Stain might mistake him for one. Because if Deku goes around smashing people indiscriminately without any heroes nearby whatsoever, there's a chance that some vigilantes might find out about a renegade vigilante going around putting villains in the hospital. Cause I got a feeling that Deku ain't gonna be pulling his punches anymore. The main bad guy of the series just personally called him out. And if there's one thing that we know our protagonist loves to do, it's shoulder the entire burden by himself, which also makes me think that it's a possibility that the users of One For All might be like, look dude, we're not letting you use our quirks anymore until you get your head on straight. Every superhero that has a ridiculous amount of strength always tends to go through a phase where they're completely powerless. So I would like to see Deku go through that phase a little bit too, especially because he's really kind of taking advantage of what he has and disregarding everybody in the meantime. And if he does cast All Might aside and gets put in a sticky situation, maybe having someone in an All Might hoodie show up and save him will act as a little bit of a wake-up call. The heroes that were present at the mansion all know of Koichi and the Vigilantes, so if they want someone not connected to the heroes to keep tabs on Deku, there's really only one group of people that he needs right now: the Vigilantes. I mean, imagine if he encounters Knuckle Duster. That's a team up I would absolutely love to see. Either way, I think in chapter 317, we're going to get a Deku that is extremely emotionally worn out. I do think he will cast aside some of the help that he's been receiving and roll solo too. So if you agree with me, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, be sure to watch out for random explosions planted by faceless villains. Cheers.